I'm watching it. And we're live! Yay! All right, let me do an audio check. I can hear me. Now can you speak?
Hey, this is Christoph. Can you hear me?
Yes. All right, last study group, and we have it down finally.
Yes! Success!
It just took us, 5 study, well, no, the audio was great last study group, so it took us 4.
We were talking about that last time where I think somebody designed a graphic for when things fail.
Mhm.
And the one time we have it, we don't even need it because we got this.
There you go.
That's
All
how it
right.
always works.
Yep, I have it on standby though, just in case. Ooh, I
Love
have
it.
us with our live in a few minutes thing, so I'm going to give you a sneak peek at swag that no one but Cheese and I have, and Cheese has it because he
Woohoo.
designed it.
Awesome.
And it is our official
Nice.
distro hopper. So I have swag finally that no one else has.
Nice. I love it.
And thanks for those of you that are tuning in. We will be starting in about 8 minutes.
Go away, Spotify.
Hey guys, we're going to be starting in about 7 minutes. Reminder, if you're logged in and watching but not in chat, try to jump in chat because we are going to be having some giveaways and definitely an opportunity for you to be able to ask questions and actually be part of the study group. Everyone, we'll be starting in about, 2 minutes, a little bit over 2 minutes. If you're having any trouble actually seeing the Twitch chat, we have found that Firefox tends to be a little bit more Twitch chat friendly, as well as the Twitch chat app on Android. I haven't tried it on Apple. I'd assume it works about the same. And if for any reason you just can't do it there, we are actively monitoring the Linux Academy Slack as well. So there are no shortage of ways to get a hold of us. But we'll be back in about 2 minutes and get this started. Hey everybody, we're here. We made it to the last study group. Can y'all believe it? Well, maybe not the last study group, but the last cloud practitioner study group. Okay, so we're gonna just kill a few moments of time while we let everybody kind of start joining in. Reminder that all of the previous AWS, I'm gonna fix this really quick so y'all can actually see me. All of the previous AWS study groups are available here on Twitch. And I guess if they start timing out or anything, we can definitely move them over to another platform. But for now, they're available here. Christoph and I are available on Slack even after today if you have any questions. Christoph has taken and passed the certification. I'll be taking mine probably on Monday. I need to go ahead and go and pay and get that settled in. If any of you have already taken it, we'd love to hear from you in the chat room. Christoph, am I missing anything in all of that?
No, I think we'll cover some of that too throughout the study group, but we definitely have some surprises for people who have attended all of the study groups. So please, after this, please send us a message so we know who you are. And then also the people that are going to go and take the exam, which hopefully is all of you. And even if you don't pass it, it's totally fine. If you don't get it the first time, please let us know. We'll do a random surprise for you as well. So yeah, we'll talk more about that during the study group.
And then a reminder that you do have resources available to you on Linux Academy, whether you're a paid member or not. If you're not a paid member, you can join on the community side. That is 100% free. Like, you need an account simply so we can keep track of the progress you've made and say, hey, you've taken X amount of training. These are the videos that are left. And AWS Essentials, which is actually probably a little bit more than you need to know for the cloud practitioner, would you say?
Yes, it's named Essentials, but it covers a lot of different things at a beginner level. So it's a very good entry point to AWS for sure.
Is definitely available for you. So go ahead and take advantage of the situation. Like, I'm one of those people that would rather be over prepared than under prepared. So I've definitely gone through it and just had a bit of fun with it. If you haven't used your live, what is it called? The free trial, 7-day free trial. It also gives you the ability to go in and start playing with AWS resources. So actually spinning up the EC2 instances and, the RDS instances that we talked about. And, you won't have to do that on the test. But I think it's one of those that if I've done something, I am more likely to recall it than if I've just seen it on paper. So another tip that might help you. Any other? Or should we go ahead and kick this off, Crystal?
Well, in this study group too, I've included some labs that are specific to the services and concepts we'll talk about. And that way, if you do want to try that out, you can launch those labs, or if you are currently a student, you can launch those labs and you can play around with it. And as you mentioned, Elle, it may not be a requirement for the exam, but be able to go through and actually do it and filling in those skills gaps, I think is a tremendous thing to do, especially to add to your resume, but also going beyond that certification. So I definitely encourage that you try things out, even if it's your own environment. Give it a shot, and
Adams,
we'll walk through that.
you might have seen me. So I have a different machine here, which I'm using to monitor our Twitch chat, which is why you see me look down. However, that derpy smile you just saw was because Nira JB19 just let us know that thanks to the study group, she took the test on Wednesday and passed it.
Yay!
So yay!
Awesome.
Congratulations!
Good job.
I will DM you to get further information, and we definitely have like a few surprises that will go out in the mail to you.
Yeah, and please reach out to us too afterwards. If you're on Slack, reach out to us there. That way we don't lose track of it, because in the live stream it could be very easy to lose track. So please reach out.
All right, well, I think that we are good to get started.
Great. You want me to take it off?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen. And please let me know when you can see the slideshow.
Yep, we're good. Y'all are going to see my thing here for a second while I try to hide my mouse. There you go.
Okay, and I'm trying to hide these guys. Okay. All right, you said you can see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So as we mentioned, and as you know, this is the last study group for the AWS Cloud Practitioner exam, not the last study group for other topics, just for this specific topic. And for this one, I thought we could tweak it a little bit and follow a different series or a different approach, because if you haven't taken the exam yet and you're getting ready to take that exam, I want to be able to share some exam tips that have helped me and that have helped others take the exam and pass the exam. Because even if you know the material really well, you may not be a great exam taker, like I am not at all. And so these tips have helped me stay focused on the exam, think about things prior to the exam, and just increase my odds of passing. So we'll talk about that towards the end. We're also going to talk about a couple of new services we haven't touched on yet, but have mentioned in the past. One of those is CloudTrail and CloudWatch, and talking about the main differences between them, as well as Lambda and some other concepts that we'll walk through. And then we're not going to have time to cover every single aspect of the Cloud Practitioner exam. Of course, there's so many different things to it, but I'll have a couple of recommendations of homework to do, so yeah, you can make sure that you study up on a couple of other services where they don't have to know in a whole lot of depth, that you just have to be familiar with what they do. So I've got a list of that as well. So that's kind of the overview of what we'll do today, and then just Q&A, ask any questions you might have. We'll try to stay on topic, but if we have some time, we can also go a little bit more off topic as well, more technical questions. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get started, as we typically do, with our homework quizzes. I think we had one or two this time. The first one was, and these are all from the PDF practice exam. The first one was, which AWS service would simplify migration of a database to AWS? And so the answer, you should know from last time, is B, AWS Database Migration Service. It's a great service to be able to migrate from on-prem to AWS, or even from AWS to AWS, like RDS, DynamoDB, things like that. Okay, so let's just dive right in by starting with AWS CloudTrail. So we've talked about a lot of different AWS services, their use cases, their benefits, and so on. But as you start using AWS in an official capacity, there's going to be so much going on and happening in your account that there's no way that you could possibly keep track of all that's happening, especially as you start adding people, as you start adding services, APIs, and things like that. And so as a result, you can actually open yourself up, and by yourself, I mean your company's resources, your AWS resources, up to security vulnerabilities or compliance issues, even if you don't mean to, because there are so many unknowns. And so to help with this, AWS launched a service a couple of years ago called CloudTrail, which allows you to monitor all of the actions that are taken by IAM users or services within your AWS account. So CloudTrail can log those events and continuously monitor those events over time, no matter the time of day. And then it can retain that account activity across your AWS infrastructure, which means that if an IAM user takes an action through, for example, the AWS console, or even the command line, SDKs, or really any other AWS service, like for example, from one EC2 instance to another, or from one EC2 instance to S3, or whatever it is, CloudTrail will keep track of all of that activity going back and forth. And you can even hook up the log files from CloudTrail to other services to analyze what's happening in those events. And if the analysis identifies something that doesn't look right or doesn't sound right, it can send a notification to your security team, to your sysadmins, or whatever else. And so they can jump on and they can investigate what's going on. They can see if it's an operation system issue, malfunction, or if it's a malicious attempt or anything like that. They can get visibility into that. So CloudTrail again really helps you monitor activity within your AWS account. And use cases of where that's really helpful is with compliance aid, making sure that your systems and everything in between is compliant with what you need it to be compliant for, depending on your industry. Security analysis, as we've mentioned, data exfiltration protection. We talked about the EC2 to S3 incident. If I have somebody logging into an EC2 instance, that EC2 instance has access to an S3 bucket, maybe it shouldn't have access to, or it does, but that person shouldn't have been able to do that. And they exfiltrate data from your S3 bucket to an unknown location. The CloudTrail would be able to log that and would tell you exactly which IP it came from, what time, location, all that information you would need to further investigate what's going on. And then also for troubleshooting. So, for example, if somebody accidentally terminates one or more EC2 instances or even deletes data from an S3 bucket, just to give a couple examples, CloudTrail would log that information. And as your sysadmins jump on to figure out what is happening, they can pull the logs from CloudTrail, and that can give them a starting point because they can see, okay, the termination request originated from this location, from this person, and maybe they can tie it back to L, for example, and L made a mistake. So now I can go to L and say, hey, walk me through exactly what you were doing at this time. Let's troubleshoot this together. So those are a couple of examples. As you can see on the right-hand side, I mentioned some other examples there. This screenshot is actually pulled from the interactive diagrams from TS course, the Cloud Practitioner course on Linux Academy, and it gives a visual representation of the fact that AWS CloudTrail can serve those a couple of use cases. It logs those things in S3 itself using gzip to compress the archives so that they're not massive files, or it helps compress them a little bit more, which is very different from CloudWatch. And I know, Elle, you even reached out yesterday where you were saying, I'm a little iffy on some of the differences between CloudTrail and CloudWatch. And so what we'll actually do is I'll I'll briefly jump into the console to show you CloudTrail. And then immediately after that, we're going to move on to CloudWatch. But I wanted to share this hands-on lab that we have at Linux Academy called AWS Access Control Alerts with CloudWatch and CloudTrail to show you that they can actually work together. So they're very different. They serve two very distinct purposes, but they can work together. And CloudTrail can work with a lot of other AWS services as well, like Lambda and some others, as we'll see. So that's a pretty neat hands-on lab that gives you exposure to a couple different things. But with that said, let me go ahead and jump into the AWS console real quick so we can pull up CloudTrail and see what that looks like in the console itself. So I'll search for CloudTrail in AWS and I'm logged in. And it will load slowly. And then once it loads, you'll see at the top here or on the main dashboard, we'll see recent events. So these events were from the 25th of October, so not too long ago. Most of these are probably from the last study group, actually. And I could actually expand this and get more information. I'm not going to just because I've got some private information on there, like IP address and things like that. But if you expand this, it will dive deeper into who made the request, from where, and so on, which is very helpful information. If I click on event history, this will pull a much longer series of events that have happened. At a high level, again, I can see the event time, the username, if it's root, and you've locked down root, if you plugged this into some kind of analysis, it could see that root made these requests, and that could be a big red flag. Root probably should not be making these requests, i.e., notify a security engineer or somebody to come take a look at it because something's out of the ordinary, especially if you see stuff like delete bucket or download or terminate instances or whatever it is. That can be a big red flag. And again, it gives you that kind of visibility. And so you can create trails. Those will monitor things and then send data over to S3. And from S3, you can, again, plug that into your analysis and go from there. So that's kind of the 5 minutes on CloudTrail. We'll talk a little bit more about it as we go along with CloudWatch. But before I do that, do you have any questions so far regarding CloudTrail?
Actually, we have a few people asking about how they can have access to the labs. Do you want to tell them a little bit about the Linux Academy labs and basically how we use them.
Absolutely. So in this specific case, since I have added them to the PowerPoint slideshow or the PDF slide that you'll get, we are sending emails before and after the meetup. So you should have received one, and if not, you'll receive one afterwards. You can download this PDF. You can click on the blue link right here, and it will take you to the external page of Linux Academy, where you can get more details about the lab, and then you can click on Take Hands-on Lab. And from there, if you don't have an account, you can sign up for a free trial, either with the yearly or monthly access plan. And from there, you'll have 7 days to take these hands-on labs. In this case, they won't be part of the free community edition account. So you would have to do a 7-day free trial in order to access it. If you already are a member, all you have to do is log in, search for that exact lab when you're logged in, and you'll be able to launch it for free. So no additional cost or anything like that. So again, these links are very easily accessible, but you can also search for them on the platform if you'd rather not download the PDF for whatever reason.
Really quick before you continue, I did want to remind people, if you do take advantage of that 7-day free trial, and I'm totally not trying to sell you anything, that's why we did the study group, so that, you know, it's accessible to everyone. But do take a chance to take a look at Tia's course. It will cover a lot of what we covered today, but in much more in length, and actually go through and give you several labs that break down actually using things like S3s or RDS. So, okay, back to you,
Absolutely.
Christoph. And if y'all have any more questions, keep putting them into the chat.
Perfect. Thank you. So again, when we talk about CloudTrail, for the most part, we're thinking about those use cases that I mentioned. And oftentimes when I think CloudTrail, I'm really thinking about some troubleshooting because that can be helpful, a lot of security, making sure things are in order and people aren't doing things or resources aren't doing things that they shouldn't be. But Amazon CloudWatch is also a type of monitoring service, but it's a lot different in the sense that it's a monitoring service that keeps an eye on your AWS resources, like your infrastructure, resources in general, applications, or even on-premises resources. So if you have EC2 instances that we've launched a couple of study groups ago, those EC2 resources, as you remember, are backed by hardware such as CPU, memory, RAM, things like that. And as you're using those in production, they might run out of resources. So something in your application might end up just hogging all the CPU, hogging all the RAM, or whatever the use case may be, that causes the server to not be able to respond to any more requests, which means your customers are not getting serviced anymore. Obviously, that's a major problem. Something like CloudWatch would see that because it's monitoring your resources at that level. So it could graph over time and show you this is when it started peaking in terms of CPU utilization, so that can also help you troubleshoot because then your sysadmins can look at that time frame, jump into the EC2 instance and look at logs, and that helps them narrow it down. But also, as we'll talk about, CloudWatch can be integrated with other services to send notifications. So if it's noticing a bad pattern, or if you set certain triggers, CloudWatch will constantly keep an eye on your resources. And if it hits those thresholds, it will send a notification so that you can be alerted, you can investigate, and so on. But it also can be used to automate things. So instead of waiting on a sysadmin to jump on, troubleshoot, and figure it out, you can have CloudWatch working with something like auto scaling to automatically launch more resources and take that unhealthy resource out of rotation while your sysadmins figure out what happened with it. That way you continue servicing customers. So CloudWatch is a very important service. Doesn't matter what your role is, you need to know about CloudWatch at some level because it integrates with so many different resources. It will help you monitor metrics for those AWS resources over time. You can create custom dashboards that way you can easily view those metrics again over time. You can monitor and store logs. You can set those alarms and events. You can even do that to trigger for billing alarms. So if you don't want billing to go above $150 per month or something like that, you could trigger it to say, hey, we think this is going to exceed your threshold or it's approaching quickly. You may want to investigate what's costing so much money. So CloudWatch is really the thing that powers a lot of that, even if you don't necessarily see it through the dashboard, but also you can access CloudWatch directly, as we'll see in a moment, to be able to set some of those conditions and some of the monitoring ahead of time and as you're using your resources for that. So this is a very important service just to kind of keep in mind. For the cloud practitioner, most of what I'm talking about may be covered. It won't go into a whole lot of depth, but one thing that you might expect to see on there is the use of CloudWatch for on-premises resources. So one thing to keep in mind with CloudWatch is even though it natively integrates with a lot of AWS services, There's also a CloudWatch agent that you can install on your own servers. You can install it on your own custom AMIs in AWS, or you can install it on premises as well. And when you configure it properly, it will send all kind of metrics back to AWS, CloudWatch, and that way you can also set monitoring in place for resources, even if those resources live outside of AWS. So this is a pretty powerful tool. There's a lot of other tools out there provided by third parties that kind of do something similar. So CloudWatch does have some limitations, but it's a really good starting point, especially when you're just getting started with AWS. And you don't have to use some third party tool unless CloudWatch just doesn't fit your needs for that. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, a great use case of CloudWatch, especially with EC2 resources, is scaling up resources up or down depending on workload. If your EC2 resources are being underutilized, CloudWatch and autoscaling can work together to automatically scale your resources down, saving you money. Or if the inverse happens and you need more resources because your servers are getting hammered by requests, CloudWatch and autoscaling can work together to scale those up. And theoretically, you wouldn't even need a sysadmin to jump in and do anything unless you want them to investigate for whatever reason. So here's another hands-on lab that we have. The one before was with CloudWatch or CloudTrail. I mean, this one is with CloudWatch and CloudWatch Logs. So we briefly talked about CloudWatch Logs, how you can send data back to CloudWatch even from on-premises. This hands-on lab is not even part of the Cloud Practitioner course, I don't think, but I think it's a pretty important one to go through, especially if you're looking to learn more about CloudWatch. It goes into a little bit more depth, probably a little bit more depth than the Cloud Practitioner exam calls for, but again, I think that's a pretty helpful skill to have, especially if you're trying to make your skills more marketable. So highly recommend this lab. As I jump into the console, please let me know if you have any questions so far about CloudWatch.
I think we're doing good on that. So several times you've mentioned about, having a sysadmin kind of come in and look at that, I guess what's causing the load to spike, or what's going on that's causing this increased need. However, AWS does provide resources within themselves so that you don't have to have like an on-prem sysadmin, if that works.
Yes, definitely.
And I
And
think
even if you're a smaller shop and you don't have dedicated sysadmins, if it's a developer taking care of these resources, they can still jump in and troubleshoot based on the information that's there. And that can make their job a whole lot easier than if they had to do things that they may not even be qualified for or try to find information. Instead, they could just send all that information through CloudWatch, and using logs, they can get more insights into what's going on with their resources. Yeah. So that's a really good point. So I don't have a lot of data on here, unfortunately, just because this is more of a demo account. I don't have a lot of resources going on, but just to illustrate, maybe I can pull up some images on Google just to show you what that looks like. From the main dashboard, again, to get started with CloudWatch, we can set up alarms. We can monitor using your existing system, application, or custom log files, create reusable dashboards. We talked a little bit about that. We can write rules for events. So events can trigger if certain things happen, and then that can trigger other things, including with AWS Lambda, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Alarms by AWS service, billing alarms, health alarms, things like that. You can customize those alarms by going in here. Again, unfortunately, I don't have any right now. Dashboards, this is where you can create some of those custom dashboards. Events, this is what we'll touch on a little bit more, but you can create events that trigger a whole bunch of stuff. And then we talked about logs, metrics that you can graph over time, and then of course settings so you can tweak things here and there. So that's why they live separately. They have very distinct purposes compared to CloudTrail and CloudWatch. But again, they can work very, very well together. And in fact, usually recommend that you set them up to work and solve for each other's cons, right? CloudTrail is really good at certain things. CloudWatch is really good at certain things. Have them work together to have a complete pipeline and visibility in there. All right. Any questions about CloudWatch still?
nope, I think.
Thank you. Awesome. Whoops. Didn't mean to click on that lab. But now that I did, if you are interested in the lab, you can also find it on the external website or internal website. Okay. So we talk a lot about notifying people, notifying sysadmins, notifying developers, notifying whoever. It might not even be a person. It could be some other kind of system or robot or chatbot or whatever it is. But we've talked a lot about notifications. And to make it easier, AWS a long time ago launched a service that enables you to send notifications across either email, text, or even HTTP endpoints based on events that happen within your AWS account. And that service is called SNS, or Simple Notification Service. So with SNS, you can send automated or manual notifications. Your system is unhealthy, it will automatically trigger that series of events that we've been talking about, and it will send a notification. Or if I want to go in and push a notification out manually, I can also do that. Again, it supports SMS, email, and HTTP endpoints. There is a use case with the Slack API. So a long time ago, I did a deep dive in AWS Lambda, and I used Lambda and SNS to send messages to a private Slack channel if something happened with my EC2 resources. So if CPU utilization went above a certain threshold, SNS would automatically hit the Slack API, and then that Slack API would ingest that information and Slack me and say, "Hey, Christoph, check this out. Something's going on with this specific server." So there's a lot of customizability you can do there. In fact, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. It also closely integrates with everything we've been talking about up to this point, including CloudWatch. And so if something, like I just said, happens with your resource, CloudWatch can trigger that, CloudWatch events can trigger that, and then it can send that information to SNS. SNS will grab that information and send it out to whoever is subscribed to those things. It does that using publishers and then subscribers. So again, the publishers might be something coming from CloudWatch pushing through. Subscribers might be those text message or text numbers, phone numbers, like my number, L's number, could be my email, L's email, or those Slack API endpoints, or really any other HTTP endpoint that would accept these kinds of requests. So the publishers and subscribers. On the right-hand side, you can also see a graphic, and I think I touched more on it. Oh, nope. So on the right-hand side, you can see SNS is comprised of topics, subscriptions, and then those publishers we talked about. The topics are really how you label and group different endpoints that you send messages to. So for example, I might have a topic that says application ABC, and then another topic that's completely unrelated. And so I want to keep those separate so that they don't mesh up with each other. And then subscriptions are the endpoints that the topic will send messages to, which is those email addresses, phone numbers, or our sysadmin, as we keep calling him here. And then the publishers, again, that could be a human, since I can do a manual notification. That could be an alarm or an event from CloudWatch, for example, that gives the SNS service the message that needs to be sent out, including all the details that you want to send out for that. So those are really the three different main groups, I guess we'll call them, of SNS. You don't have to memorize this, just be kind of familiar with what that is. That way, if you do end up using SNS, it's not a complete surprise. You kind of understand how that's already set up. So this is a little bit more of it might look a little hectic of a graphic, but we're going to break it down a little bit more. And once we break it down, you'll see exactly what I've been talking about this whole time. And again, this is from the interactive diagrams on the Cloud Practitioner course. Tia did a great job with these. They look fantastic. But if you start from the left side, and let me move this out of the way here. If you start from this side right here, you have an EC2 instance, and that EC2 instance is telling us that it's working just fine. So there's no need for any further action. It's serving customers as expected. So great, nothing happens. I go to sleep at night. I'm a happy guy. However, in the middle of the night, oh no, I crashed. The EC2 instance is not serving customers anymore. Something's happening. And we have customers across the globe. And so they're all awake. And even though I'm sleeping, we need to be serving those customers. So the EC2 instance has crashed. And because we set up CloudWatch, CloudWatch will detect that crash happened, whatever that crash looks like. Because it detects that the crash happened, and because I've set up an alarm that triggers when that crash happens, CloudWatch will trigger that alarm, which can then push an event to Amazon SNS, which will then trigger SNS to send me a text message in the middle of the night, which will then wake me up because I'm the system admin. And so now I can investigate and see what's going on. So it's kind of that series of events where if you configure things properly, it will automatically take care of things for you. And that's the beauty of this, because otherwise, how would you know that your servers are down? How would you know that customers are being serviced apart from them reaching out to your support? But again, I'm sleeping. So I wake up the next morning and I have a whole lot of angry customers, versus this model here tells me as soon as it's happening, or even in some cases tells me before it's going to happen. If it notices something's just not right, it could even notify me before that happens. I hop on before it happens and I fix it before a crash even happens, so your customers are not even experiencing any issues at all. So that's how powerful this kind of automation and system can be, and that's why these are all integral services that can work independently, but also can work in unison to make sure that that you're servicing your customers properly. Any questions about this specific workflow or use case, or kind of how that goes from one to the other to the other?
Yeah, we seem to have a question, I guess, on scalability, and that's, could you configure this to say, hey, you know what, we need to spin up a new instance, or we need to take X amount of activity?
Yes, absolutely. So in this case here, even if we have this workflow, which we could definitely keep that, because if something goes wrong, somebody needs to know about it. Even if you automate scaling up, you need to identify what happened and why. That way you can prevent it from happening again. But in addition to this workflow, I can also add a separate path where the exact same steps happen, except instead of the Amazon Simple Notification Service, I can have auto scaling. So if you're using EC2 resources, like in this case, this workflow will happen, and then a second workflow will happen that will trigger auto scaling to launch more EC2 instances, because it's noticed that there's one or more EC2 instances failing. So it's going to bring up fresh, healthy instances to replace that broken instance. And if you've configured it properly, and a bunch of other factors that can become very complicated, that could actually spin up within either seconds or even minutes before a customer even experiences it. But like I mentioned, that can become quite complicated, especially depending on your architecture. But it's something that is part of understanding AWS for certain jobs. And that's why some people can make really good salaries, because it becomes pretty complicated stuff. Even though AWS makes it easier to automate stuff, it's usually not as simple as just clicking a couple buttons and that happens. But you do have the ability and the support from the platform to be able to set up those kinds of complex, if this then that type of workflows and architectures. So yes, long story short, winded answer to that, but yes, you can absolutely automate scaling up and scaling down depending on what's happening with your infrastructure.
All right,
In addition to notifying the poor sysadmin.
I have a second question here that I'm going to put my laptop in front of me just so I make sure I read it right. So the original question was, are there any known limitations to this? So I asked for a little bit of clarity, and the example was given. For example, like, can it trigger a mass notification to 5 or 10 people, or is it limited only to a specific person? And then I guess what that would be, could it trigger an action to complete while notifying someone else and, doing something else as well?
Yes. So let me answer those separately. You may have to remind me of the second one.
Okay.
But the first answer is yes. Now, in order to be able to receive messages from SNS, you have to subscribe, meaning that if you set me up with an email notification at my personal email, I have to click and accept to be a subscriber to that topic, because otherwise people would use this to spam people, right? And so to prevent spamming, AWS requires that the person receiving notifications subscribes and accept the conditions to be able to receive it. But other than that, you can definitely notify 5 people. I think there are some restrictions to how many people you can notify per topic. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's a pretty big number. Like you can notify most of the people that you'll need to notify within your company if this does happen. And the second answer, I think I've already partially answered, if I understood the question correctly, which is you can have multiple workflows happening at the exact same time doing totally different things. One workflow notifies, the other one workflow is working to fix things automatically. So you can definitely do those things simultaneously. Yes.
So I went ahead and just pulled it up out of curiosity, and you're limited to 10 million subscribers per topic, or 100,000 per account.
10 million or
10 million
that
subscriptions per
seems weird.
talking, or yeah, 100,000 topics per account.
Oh, okay. But
Mr.
10
Worthing.
million subscribers, I'd love to meet somebody that's using anywhere near that amount to understand their use case. That's insane. So yeah, you can definitely subscribe 5 people.
I think that's going to be it right now.
Okay, awesome. That's hilarious. They have such weird facts sometimes. I wonder how they come up with them. But anyway, it's probably to show you how scalable that service is, I'm sure. Here's another lab that I highly recommend if you're interested in learning more about this, which is monitoring and notifications with CloudWatch events and SNS. So really tying into what we just talked about. Event Y happens, notification Y is sent out to subscribers. All right, time for a little pop quiz to kind of recap what we've just talked about. Which service would you use for this scenario? An alarm was triggered and a notification was sent at 4:03 p.m. on a Tuesday, and your sysadmins are trying to figure out what API call triggered a critical service to shut down. Would you use Amazon CloudWatch, AWS CloudTrail, or Amazon SNS?
Let's see. All right, so we've got one answer. What do the rest of you guys think? Okay, now we're getting in a little bit of disagreement. I feel like I should be doing refereeing a football game. Like it goes left, it goes right. That would be sorry. That's not American football. Okay, so we do have a. Oh, I was about to say we have a general consensus, but now we have a, I guess, tie split between B and C.
B and C. Okay. So I wonder why C, right? And maybe you can clarify in the comments. But the reason why it would be B or AWS CloudTrail is because, and I think I can see where I was kind of being tricky there, and that was the purpose of it. But this scenario could use all of these services, of course. But the main question here is a little tricky because it's asking you specifically to figure out what API call triggered a critical service to shut down. And CloudTrail, if you've configured it, would enable you to jump in once you get that notification and really identify who made the call or what made the call at what time, what IP address, all of those details would be stored in CloudTrail. So SNS could notify you of that, but usually SNS is more of the starting point to investigate. To get the full gamut of details that you need to really thoroughly investigate, you'd have to jump into CloudTrail in this case in order to get that information that you need.
So I think before you change screens, this might be something we can talk about for test taking skills when you actually sit down and take the test. And that's the fact that a lot of time you get superfluous, is that how you say it, information added to the question. So it's really
Yes.
important just to slow down and read what it is that you're actually trying to figure out. And for me, that would be what API call triggered the critical service. Like which one of these services is going to give me that information?
Exactly. What API call? CloudWatch doesn't really wouldn't really tell you what API call. It might tell you that there's a problem, but it wouldn't really say an API call caused this and here's what it is. SNS would notify you. Yeah, CloudTrail is the one that would give you that, right? So it's kind of elimination. All these might be really good answers, but there's one that stands out because of those critical words, even though there's a bunch of fluff around those words. That's a really good tip to add to that. Yeah. All right, second question. What would you use for this scenario? Your team has configured and deployed a critical service to production, and they need to implement monitoring to keep an eye on resource utilization so they can make sure the service continues serving API requests. Is it Amazon CloudWatch, CloudTrail, or SNS?
We've got people a little slow to respond, but there we go. I was gonna say we have one brave person. Now we've got some more coming in, a little slower. And this is interesting. We've got a little bit of a split on votes from our people who are here every single week. So it is split between C and A.
Yes, I was hoping it would be awesome. Okay, the answer is going to be CloudWatch. The reason for this is because even though SNS would be sending you the notification, SNS is not like the purpose of the service of SNS is not just to fulfill this scenario here. What I mean by that is if you have SNS by itself, it wouldn't know that there's a problem with production. It would just know if somebody sent or something sent it that information. So if you don't have CloudWatch that's configured and deployed to monitor that critical service in production, then SNS would never know to trigger. You'd have to have CloudWatch in order for SNS to trigger. And that's why in this specific question and the way it's worded, you would select Amazon CloudWatch as the correct answer. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I'm keeping up in the. I love how many people answer it right after you tell what the right answer is. So we had at least 3 people
Smart.
try to sneak it in under the wire there.
Yeah, you can't sneak past Elle. Remember, she's our new advanced AI. We spent a lot of time developing, so she'll catch you.
That's why you have to make every single study group so you get all the inside jokes.
Yeah, people that haven't attended the last one probably have no idea what I'm talking about. All right, one more pop or one or two more pop quizzes here, and then we'll move on. Your team believes that some important data was transferred from S3 to an unknown location without following procedures to get approval. Which service can they use to investigate whether this happened? And if so, who transferred the data? Is it CloudWatch, CloudTrail, or SNS?
This is a good one when it comes to security,
Mm-hmm.
and we look like we have overwhelming votes. I'm gonna give just a few more seconds to let those last trail people come in. Make sure I'm not accusing them of anything they didn't really do. But it looks like B is definitely the winner on this one.
And we could always blame it on lag, right? They probably
Yeah.
typed it. Maybe they're far away from us, and so they only see it after I've said it. But We'll give them the benefit of the doubt, right? So yes,
Sound like me in
CloudTrail.
sixth
Yep.
grade. All the excuses.
Yeah, right. It's lag input. Yeah. Okay. Lambda. Lambda is one of my personal favorites. I'm really excited about this section. Um, I don't work with Lambda a whole lot now, but from time to time, I find it pretty useful for some use cases. But I used to do a lot more development with it way back in the day. And when I first joined Linux Academy as a training architect, Lambda Deep Dive was my first course. So I have a special place in my heart for Lambda. It's also changing quite a bit of the way that people build applications. So I think it's a very exciting technology that you've probably heard about at some level, just because it's often making the news for I don't know if revolutionary is a little bit too excessive, but it's really changing the way that some people are approaching cloud computing. So, in a nutshell, AWS Lambda is serverless computing that, in some cases, can even completely replace the need for EC2 instances. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but some benefits of that, and the reason that can become very attractive is because you only have to pay for the compute time that you need. I know that kind of sounds like what I've said about EC2 in the past, but what I'm talking about here is sub-second metering, meaning that you're only charged for 100 millisecond increments times the number of times that your function runs. So instead of an EC2 instance that would charge you definitely for longer periods than sub-second metering, so like if I launch an EC2 instance and I use it for 100 milliseconds, it won't just charge me for 100 milliseconds. Also, it would take a lot longer for that EC2 instance to launch than 100 milliseconds. Whereas Lambda functions can run that quickly, which is another huge benefit. In addition to that, it's also able to infinitely scale up to demand even faster than EC2, as I just talked about. You don't have to load a whole operating system. You don't have to do any of that. The function runs when the function is needed. And especially as you've warmed it up, it becomes extremely fast at responding to those events. So that's definitely a benefit to it as well. Another benefit is you can configure it and it handles everything else for the most part for you. You don't have to worry about that infrastructure. We've talked about auto scaling. We talked about setting up CloudWatch with CloudTrail and SNS and load balancing and AMIs. All of that complexity that we've talked about over the last few study groups almost basically goes out the window if you're using something like AWS Lambda. You don't have to worry about auto scaling. They do that for you behind the scenes. You don't have to worry about load balancers. They do that for you behind the scenes. You don't have to worry about all this other stuff or a lot of the other stuff that we've talked about. They do it for you behind the scenes. The other cool thing about Lambda is it integrates with a bunch of other AWS services. You're talking about SNS, CloudWatch, you're talking about S3, a lot of other services can integrate directly with Lambda, which makes it very easy to solve for some use cases that otherwise would require a lot of manual work, taking your dev team time away or infrastructure team time away from building other cool stuff. So Lambda has a lot of great benefits. Some use cases for Lambda might be something like data processing. So again, executing code in response to triggers. What I mean by that is imagine you have an Amazon S3 bucket. Maybe you're a social media platform. And when people sign up to your social media platform, they upload an image of themselves, right? A screenshot of or a selfie of their face. As they upload that image, especially with today's mobile phones, that image could be multiple megapixels heavy. That's way too heavy for today's internet, especially on browsers or on phones. You're on Subway. That image would load so slow that it's not worth having. So instead, what you could do is, as soon as that image is uploaded to S3, if you integrate it properly, it will trigger Lambda to grab that image and to spit out multiple different versions of that image that are much smaller resolution and much smaller in size. They could be tens or hundreds of kilobytes versus tens of megabytes. So you're talking about a significant difference, completely automated. Once you set this up, you don't even have to touch it with a human being. It inputs into S3, S3 inputs into Lambda, Lambda inputs back into S3, done in a matter of potentially even seconds. So that's a really, really cool other benefit that we have here. I kind of jumped the gun with the real-time processing. That's what I was talking about there. You have an event that happens, it triggers the Lambda function. The Lambda function only runs for the period of time that it needs to accomplish its task. And as soon as it has a success with that task, it shuts down immediately, and you're only charged 400 millisecond increments. That could result in significant cost savings in a lot of different cases. Another good use case is to extract, transform, and load, or ETL, as you might have heard it referred to. That's really talking about data validation, filtering, and sorting and other transformations. So for example, if you have data in DynamoDB and you need to extract, transform, and load that data somewhere else, you could use Lambda to extract that data from DynamoDB, transform it via the code in the function, and then load it into another database or another DynamoDB database. So that kind of use case. IoT and mobile backends oftentimes use Lambda because of its flexibility and because it's very good at building APIs where you don't have to manage the EC2 instances, or even web applications. Some web applications are running in part or sometimes even in whole using Lambda functions instead of having to maintain EC2 resources. Of course, this sounds great. There are definitely some limitations. We won't really talk too much about those limitations or go too much into depth with Lambda. Again, we do have a Lambda deep dive on Linux Academy if you are interested. But this is a great technology, don't get me wrong, but it also doesn't completely replace servers. I just want to put that out there. So that's something else to keep in mind. Here's a lab. I just mentioned we have a Lambda deep dive. We also have a lab talking about that exact use case that I mentioned, which is trigger an AWS Lambda function from an S3 event. You can check that out if you're interested. As I pull up the AWS console with Lambda, do you have any questions so far about Lambda?
All right, guys, if you have any questions, make sure to get them in chat. Personally, I just wanted to say thank you for that example. I actually, though I'd studied Lambda, didn't really know any practical use cases or ways that it was being used right now. So having that one actually makes me understand how it's being used.
A lot of times it's if you don't need something running all of the time, you only need it to run on specific events. Lambda might be a great use case for that. There's I think I already mentioned this a little bit, but I had created this function where if something happened with my application, then it would trigger Lambda, which would then send a notification through the Slack API to let me know, hey, this happened. The alternative to having Lambda do that would have been to set up an EC2 instance, and that instance is sitting there 99.99999% of the time, not doing anything at all, and just costing me money. Versus in this case, for that 0.0001% of the time that I need a notification, it just launches and I pay practically nothing for it. So those kinds of use cases are definitely helpful for it. So on the Lambda console, I really like how they did this because you can actually see a lot of the value of it without even going further into the product itself. But from here, you have a very simple example of a function that could execute in Lambda. It could literally be these 4 lines of code with a comment in between. So really 3 lines of code that just say, hello world. So if an event happens, I want you to run. And bam, as soon as it runs, it spits out hello world. Notice how fast that is. I'm going to change it to show you this is not a gimmick. Within less than a second, I received that response. And I'm just pressing a button. No quote unquote server is running in the background. That's how fast it is. I could have written 3 lines of code and I already get the end result for what I was trying to do without having to set up a VPC, EC2, S3, everything else that we've talked about. So that's pretty awesome. Any questions?
Nope, I think we're good to keep going.
Great. I'm just brushing the surface with this. There are more parts of the tutorial that you could follow, so you can really see some of the use cases that it could do. So it's really cool. I definitely recommend you check out some of those labs to proceed with Lambda if you have any interest in it. All right, let's move on to some more pop quizzes, and then what I'll do is kind of talk about other services to review, and then we'll go through some exam taking tips. So which of these benefits, which of these are benefits that AWS Lambda has over EC2? Select 3. 1, you don't need to manage permissions. 2, sub-second metering. 3, requires no knowledge of how to manage servers. Or 4, your code only runs when it's needed.
Right. And while people get their answers, we do have a question coming in, and it's a little unrelated but somewhat related. And it's, what coding language is the Linux Academy Lambda taught in? And I guess
language. I'd have to double check. It's probably Python and or Node.js, maybe both. I'm not sure, but probably those 2.
Would, if they wanted to take your deep dive that you wrote, would they need any previous coding knowledge?
If they wanted to take my deep dive, they'd have to travel back in time, unfortunately, just because the Lambda has changed so much that it's no longer up there. It was too outdated. And so we had to refresh it. And I forget, I think Mark might have done the new one. I don't remember. But no, you don't really need upfront programming language. They'll provide the examples. They'll provide some of the code samples that you need. But if you're going to use Lambda, you're going to need some kind of programming knowledge because you have to write the functions. That's almost the only thing you have to do is be able to write the code that executes. So you do need some programming knowledge if you want to use Lambda.
Okay, and we have our official, I guess, tally here. We're going to go with B, C, and D.
I made it too easy, didn't I? There you go. Good job. Awesome. You of course need to still manage permissions, right? Security is still very important. And a lot of times people kind of overlook that, especially with how easy it is to set up Lambda. But you do want to manage permissions for your Lambda functions. Make sure you give the least privileges. If somebody has access to a Lambda function that has too many privileges, they could run code that extracts data that they shouldn't be able to extract, or adds Trojan horses, or who knows what. So you have to lock it down. You have to manage permissions. Second question, which of these startups would be, sorry, I can't read today. Which of these setups would be the most efficient to notify your sysadmins, poor sysadmin, that EC2 system resources aren't optimally performing? Is it A, B, C, or D? This one's a little tricky.
Yeah, we're going to have to give our sysadmin a raise. We've really put him to work this time. All right, we've got some answers slowly coming in. Now there's a question here that might be a little too deep leveled into, or a little too deep for what we're doing here, but they wanted to know that when working with something like a Java project where it has multiple classes that spread across multiple files, is this possible to do in Lambda, or how would you do that?
I haven't done it specifically with Java, but I have done that with Node.js and Python. You can bundle packages that way. So if you have some packages that are required for your function to work, you can actually create a code bundle that includes your code and the packages within that bundle. You upload that bundle to Lambda, it extracts it for you, and then it runs that code. And since it has the packages in there, then it's able to function properly. I'm not super sure of all the restrictions around there, especially since that was a couple of years ago since I've really messed with it at that level. And they've done a lot of iterations with Lambda. So I bet there's even more support for that kind of stuff now. But even back then, it was possible, yes.
And then when it comes to this question, we have split answers. We have B and D.
B and you said B and D?
Yeah, B like bunny and D is in dog.
That's funny. So the answer is actually C.
Oh, guys, nobody got it. Well, I guess we're going to need a little bit more explanation on this one.
So here's the main thing, and I could see why you would pick the Lambda one. The reason why I threw in Lambda is because technically, yes, technically that would work. You could have it set up that way, and that would work fine. But it's even easier to set this up using SNS, because then you don't really have to mess with any code. SNS doesn't require any programming. You could just set it up to say, if this event happens, send that information over via SMS. With Lambda, you'd have to grab that information, process it in some way, and then figure out a way to send an SMS notification, which isn't even natively integrated. So long story short, it's a lot more work than needed compared to using something like SNS. The reason why I didn't pick D is because in this case, you're talking about resources that aren't optimally performing. So CloudTrail isn't really looking at how your resources are performing. It's more logging API calls and things that are happening in the environment. CloudWatch is really the one that's taking a look at resources. So in this specific use case, you would not need CloudTrail sending anything to CloudWatch. CloudWatch events by itself would gather that information and say, these resources aren't optimally performing. Let's go ahead and send that over to SNS, and then SNS can easily send an SMS notification. Does that answer? Does that specify a little bit more?
I think so. Do you guys have any further questions? And I'm over here on the side working. I did reach out to Mark. It seems that, you know what, this is a topic that people are really interested in and they might like to deep dive a little bit. So he said that he really recommends that people know Python 3.7. However, he doesn't do anything very scary in the Lambda course, so definitely walks through all the code. However, Keith, one of our other training architects, did write a prereq course for it, going through the basic Python that you'll need. So like that, like we planned it.
Python's so versatile too. It's a great language to have under your belt.
I love that the few answers that came in afterwards were A, so they really weren't expecting C to be the answer. So
that's awesome.
All right,
if I need to clarify, by the way, please let me know. I'd be happy to spend more time on it. So other services I do recommend that you get familiar with. You don't have to understand these at a very technical level or anything like that. Just read their description on the marketing website. Maybe read through some of the documentation. Just understand what they are and how they're different than everything else we've talked about. And these are going to be AWS Elastic Load Balancers and auto scaling. I wish I could have spent more time on this, but we just didn't have the time, and it's not a critical enough component to spend that much time on it in these study groups. Route 53, you might expect to see a couple questions about what that does, so definitely be familiar with it. Analytics tools like Athena and EMR, those are interesting to learn about as well. Amazon Lightsail, AWS organizations, and how that helps you with billing and cost and things like that. And then I know you mentioned Cloud HSM versus KMSL. I don't know if you want to provide some additional context around that, but I know you were taking the practice exam on Linux Academy, and this was one of the, not to put you on the spot, but this is one of the
No,
ones you got wrong, right? And
it
so
was.
you were asking about the differences between the two, and overall, I would say that most people can use KMS, key management service, which makes it easy for you to create and manage keys. And that way you can control it and use encryption across a wide range of AWS services. So it's a great tool to be familiar with. HSM, I think, is really only necessary if you have some specific compliance that you need for. KMS is going to be, like most things on AWS, shared resources across other people as well. Of course, they have security in place so that they can get access to your encryption keys, but at the end of the day, it's still virtually shared, or I should say hardware shared, versus Cloud HSM is dedicated to you, hardware that's dedicated to you. So again, it's kind of more of a, how much do you want to pay? How much do you care about that? And do you really need to be compliant? And I forget the exact compliance that it is required for, but for the most part, you would use KMS. It would be cheaper too. The other thing to be familiar with on is the details page for the AWS acceptable use policy. And in fact, there's a pop quiz about that. We haven't covered it, so don't beat yourself up if you don't get it right. We'll cover it in this next string of pop quizzes. But what I thought would be interesting here is, in the past, I've given you homework to take a look at the Cloud Practitioner PDF document and answer some of the questions. Since we won't have a follow-up study group, since this is the last one, I wanted to go through the homework that I would have assigned and walk through this with you. So the first question I was going to assign is, which service can identify the user that made the API call when an Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud EC2 instance is terminated? Is it CloudWatch? Is it CloudTrail? Is it X-Ray? Or is it IAM?
All right, guys, come on, we can do this together. All right, I will be the first one to put it out there. I would say CloudTrail. Let's see what other people are saying. Hey, don't know these questions, so don't just copy me, though. All right, everyone is saying CloudTrail.
Good job. Number 9, which service would you use to send alerts based on Amazon CloudWatch alarms? Is it SNS, CloudTrail, Trusted Advisor, or Route 53? Or Route 53?
I would say Route 53, so we'll see. All
I
right.
don't know what the proper saying is.
Well, it would have to be with, I mean, what would you say in the road? You would say route, right? I don't know.
I've heard both,
Route?
so I don't
Okay.
know.
All right, we're just gonna start talking GIF or GIF now. All right, it's
the correct
A.
answer is a SNS. Good job. Okay, this is the one that's a little bit tricky. Where can a customer find information about prohibited actions on AWS infrastructure? And that's going to be that AWS acceptable use policy. So I recommend you just read through it. You don't have to memorize it or anything like that. Just make sure you understand what's in it. So if you see a question like this, you're not completely thrown off and don't know what to answer. It's good to have that information. All right, so that's it for the pub quizzes. I just wanted to wrap this up with a few different exam tips. These have really helped me out, and I hope they'll help you out as well as you go and take the exam. The first tip I have is, before you even go and take the exam, identify areas that you're weak in by reviewing those objectives that you need to complete for the exam, and then trying to teach topics to someone else. Because the thing is that I've found, if you can explain it, then you finally understand it. If you try to explain it to people and your explanation falls apart, that means you don't really fundamentally understand it yet. You may want to review that. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, don't worry. It's okay if you don't pass. You can always try later or again. So don't fret over it. Don't stress yourself out to the point where you actually cause yourself to fail. Just relax, take a deep breath. You've got this. Number 3, give yourself plenty of time to arrive at the testing center if you don't take it online. They have recently made it where you can proctor online from your home or office. uh, conflicting information. If you guys want to chat offline about that, I've heard some good things and bad things about doing it that way. I haven't tried online. I've only done it at testing centers. So give yourself plenty of time to drive there, especially if there's a wreck. You don't want to be stressing out. And then while you're on the way, clear yourself of any distractions and focus. Focus ahead of time. I don't know if you meditate or do anything like that. I typically try to do some kind of basic meditation. It helps me get clear my head and focus, and really helps me focus on the exam. Number four, use the sheets of paper or whiteboard that they provide you with. That way you can write down facts or other thoughts that are in your head. Because if you're trying to remember those facts in your head as you're going through the exam, it's using mental capacity for unnecessary things. Instead, if you're afraid you're going to forget those, just write them all down as soon as you sit down and they tell you it's okay to get started. That way you can clear your head again and focus on the exam. Number five, super important. Please read this one multiple times. Pay close attention to what the question is asking and look for tricky words in the questions and in the answers. Read every single word. Kind of like that question where most people didn't answer correctly. It's really looking at the tricky services thrown in there. I added one tricky service, which was not necessary. The other answer didn't have that tricky service that wasn't necessary. So that makes it the best answer. You can expect to see questions like that. So be very careful. Don't start reading it. Automatically assume that you have the answer and answer it. Read the entire question. Something at the very end could completely change the answer. Number six, don't spend too much time on questions you can't answer quickly. Mark them for review and come back later. This was a big tip for me that helped me a lot. If I read it and I'm like, you know what, I'm just not sure, mark it for review, go to the next one, answer all the ones that you know for sure, and then you can focus and spend more time on the ones that you're not too sure of. And that way you can blow through the exam much faster and you're not mentally exhausting yourself so that you get to easier questions and you're just too exhausted to be able to get them right. So this is another big one. And finally, review the questions at the end if you do have the time and make mental notes of tricky questions that you came across, because if you do end up failing it, then at least you'll have those mental notes of where to focus your studying efforts for when you go and take it again, I think in 14 days or however long you want, so that you can really focus on the right areas. Elle, can you think of any other tips, or do you want to expound on any of these?
Sure, I'll give tips if you decide to take it at home. The OpenStack is a proctored test that I took that you get to do in the comfort of your own house. I will tell you guys, definitely be sure that your office is cleaned before you get in with a proctor. That is to say that once you sign in, don't have any of your peripherals connected to your laptop. If you're using a laptop, they'll ask you to pick it up and basically give them a 180 of the room, or maybe even a full 360. I remember them asking me to look under my desk. I don't remember them asking to look at the roof, but they will, if they see a piece of paper laying somewhere, ask you to remove it from the room. They might ask you to take down notes that you have perhaps written on a whiteboard. You will be asked to be centered, so I'd have to kind of get my camera and center on it, keep my hands where the proctor can see them. And what else? Oh, and you can also not read the question to yourself. So if I'm sitting here kind of just reading out loud, they don't know that you don't have a recorder somewhere and you're kind of just trying to test dump. So be aware that that adds a little bit of stress. So definitely read up a little bit on the testing environment. Go ahead and just kind of have a clean office, or find a place where you can take it that doesn't have like all these extras. I wish I could spin this around so you could see, like, you know, just all the notes and papers I have laying around, because the last thing you want to do is be frazzled right before you sit down and start taking that test.
The other thing I just thought about too is I've never done an online test like that. I don't think I would like it, purely from the perspective that somebody's literally staring at you the entire time. That creeps me out for some reason. So, like if I'm scratching my face a weird way, I'll feel so self
Yep.
conscious that somebody's literally staring at me. I'd rather just go in the testing center, even if even though they'll be looking at cameras there, it's just not the same, right? They're looking at a lot of people. They're not just looking at you directly. So I don't know, that freaks me out. But anyway, thanks for sharing those tips. Good to know. I know we're a little bit over time here, so I want to wrap this up with a little bit of homework just to help you out. Download all the presentation slides that we've gone throughout the study group and review them one by one again. I think that's pretty important. Download those sample questions, go through them one more time, make sure you can answer all of them. After our study group, you should be able to answer those 100%. If you aren't able to do that, please reach out. We'll help you fill in those gaps. Take the Linux Academy practice exam a few times, especially if you have a membership. Make sure you don't memorize answers. That's not going to help you at all, because we can't break NDA. So they're not the exact same questions, but ensure you understand what they're asking and review if you don't. And then, like I said, reach out if you need any help at all. We're here for that. To wrap up, let us know if you pass or fail. We will send a surprise at random. So please let us know. Otherwise, we won't know to send you a surprise at random. And if you showed up to all study groups, again, contact us and we'll do another drawing for a surprise as a thank you for showing up to all study groups and being so supportive of what we were trying to do here. So I really hope this helped you out. I appreciate you all coming out. I appreciate the collaboration, the questions, and the time spending with you. And I really, really hope this helps you out. And I'm not kidding, it will make my day to hear that you passed. So please reach out.
Now, you guys can go ahead and start dropping off, but I am going to go ahead and address the elephant in the room that I have been ignoring this entire study group, and that is people are asking is this the last one? Will we be doing anything else for like the CSAA or anything else? And I will jump in on this one, and Christoph, you can add to it. Honestly, guys, we need some time to learn ourselves. You know, we are not experts in everything. I myself have to actually take the time and take the test. Christoph, I know you have a very busy schedule and lots of conferences. So for the rest of this year, there will not be one. That is not to say that there won't be anything happening in the new year. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I've really enjoyed this. I think this provides a lot of value. I feel like a lot of people feel that way as well. So I could see us definitely doing more study groups. I don't know if they'll be in AWS specifically, but I know you and your group have also done more study groups, L. So I'm sure there will be more coming. We haven't put out a schedule yet. So stay tuned for more information on that.
All right, guys, have a great day. And
Thanks so
yeah,
much.
make sure to join us on Slack, and we'll see you there. Bye.
Bye bye.